Welcome back to Call Time with Katie Birnbaum. Thanks again for your viewership. I know I say this every week, but it is so fun chatting with theater's best and brightest and getting to connect with a theater-loving audience. It's really been the highlight of my year. Speaking of theater's best and brightest, I truly have one of the best and brightest, the brightest bulb in the chandelier today with me. I worked with this wonderful woman back in 2018, and I've just been in awe of everything she does ever since. So I can't wait to chat with her and bring her to your screens. So without further ado, the lovely Carmel Dean. Welcome.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much. I want to confess to viewers that it's fascinating to me. Maybe it's not to others, but the fact that it's it's Friday morning for you. What time is it for you?
It is. I'm talking to you from the future. It's Friday morning at 9 a.m.
Wow.
Down here in cold, wintry Melbourne, Australia.
So is your mind just like always in two different time zones because of this? Because I assume you're doing a lot of business with America at the same time.
Yeah, I'm basically only working on American projects. So I have these windows at the beginning and end of every day that I have to get all of my Zoom meetings in. Um, and my collaborators have all been so amazing, being flexible enough to do that. But there have been times where I've had to pull all-nighters. I did a workshop a couple of months ago for Mystic Pizza, and it was a regular 10 to 6 day in New York, but I was getting up and working from 1 a.m. to 10 a.m. or something. So I basically gave myself jet lag, just working, opposite hours as a night shift. I mean, we work weird hours in the theater anyway.
Well, I should say, if you didn't already figure out, Carmel is from Australia, Perth to be exact, where she received her bachelor's in music from the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. From there, she received a Fulbright to attend NYU's Graduate Musical Theater Writing Program, from which she earned a degree in musical theater writing. And from there, she's gone on to make a name for herself as one of the most multifaceted artists in the theater business. Carmel is a composer, an arranger, a musical director, and a pianist. She was the music director for Broadway's If Then, Hands on a Hardbody, American Idiot, and the associate musical director for Spelling Bee. We've had a lot of Spelling Bee alumni on the show. I wonder why, but it's great.
Yeah.
She's been Chita Rivera's musical director for many years. She worked on the 2000 Olympic opening ceremony, arranged vocals for the band Phish, and performed with Green Day at the 2010 Grammy Awards. If all that wasn't enough, her debut musical, correct me on the pronunciation, Renascence.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, amazing. Opened to critical acclaim off Broadway and won the Best New Musical Award at the 2018 Broadway Alliance Awards. Her song cycle, Well Behaved Women, stars LaShawne's, Bonnie Milligan, and Andrea Burns, among others, and was performed to a sold-out run at Joe's Pub. So that is a lot of credits, and I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface there. We have so much to discuss, but is there any glaring things that I missed in your career?
That was amazing and perfect.
Okay, great.
You
Well,
make me
I
sound
mean,
so fancy. I'm not, but that was lovely.
well, I did lift most of it from your website, which is a great website, by the way. People should
Oh,
check
great.
it out. Yeah, I love the icon at the top.
Yeah, that's a very it's a nod to an Australian Matchbox brand, which is actually also my tattoo. Redhead.
Wow.
Yes, because I am a natural redhead.
Yeah, I was gonna
So
say your hair is different.
yeah, it's a little blonde now.
I want to start at the very beginning,
Mhm.
and I assume your window into theater was through music. So did you start playing an instrument, the piano or something when you were little? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was a baby pianist. Started taking lessons when I was 3.5, and I started with the Suzuki method, which was quite popular back in the 80s, and it still is. And I just worked my way up through the classical piano repertoire as a child, and I did a lot of piano competitions and workshops. And my parents were pretty serious and were pretty disciplined with me. So I was just always playing piano and always practicing, and it was a big part of my life. And I think because I was good at it and it was really just one of the only things that I did, I thought, oh, well, I'm just going to become a classical pianist. So I just kept on that track all through school and high school.
So you went to college for piano?
I did. Yeah. I started my degree in classical piano.
Wow.
Halfway through, I discovered musical theater
Tell me
because I
about
wasn't,
that. What was the
yeah,
discovery?
I wasn't a theater kid, which is so weird because I ended up call myself a theater nerd, but I didn't discover it until quite late. I did a musical in high school, in 12th grade, and that piqued my interest a little bit. But then, like I said, I started doing classical piano at university here. But I discovered the local amateur musical theater scene. And the very first show that I did as a pianist was, or in that sort of, community theater circuit, was Side by Side by Sondheim. And it's a two piano cabaret type or Sondheim review. And I'd only heard of Sondheim as writing the lyrics to West Side Story. So it completely blew me away that this guy, whose name I'd seen on my parents' LP of West Side Story, was actually an incredible composer. And that just blew my mind open. And I just, from then, just have been a huge Sondheim nut. And then I was like, oh, wait, theater is really fun, and theater music's really fun. And you're collaborating with people all the time, because I'd been in a little practice room practicing my scales and all of my classical repertoire for so long, just thinking, oh, this is the only thing I can do with my skills. So it really just opened my eyes to what other possibilities were out there for me career wise. And, just there's something about when you do your first musical and you fall in love with it, that it changes everything. It's so, I'm sure you had that experience. So many people I know who are in the biz had that one defining theater camp or production or class or something where they're like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. So yeah, I very much just fell in love with theater from then on, and switched my major. I actually didn't technically switch my major, but I switched universities. I went from my classical music program to what happens to be the best music theater institution in Australia, WAPA, the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, was in my hometown. So I talked my way into transferring my degree to there, and just making up my own program, essentially, of studying music direction with all of the music theater performance kids. So I was like, I will music direct everything that you need me to do in the next couple of years. So I just kind of made up my own degree. Well, I made up my own program, but got the same classical music degree, but from that new institution.
And I'm sure your classical training has only helped throughout your
Yeah,
career, which I'm
for
sure we'll
sure.
talk about
Yeah,
later.
yeah, for sure.
Was there forgive me because I don't know that much about Australia, besides I feel like I've learned more about it in the pandemic because it was the only place where any theater was happening for so long. But was there at the time a robust musical theater scene for you to like tap into and learn, or was that a big reason why you wanted to study in New York?
Yeah, look, nothing compares to New York. The Australian population is much smaller. I mean, we have 22 million people here, in the entire country.
Right.
And where I grew up in Perth is on the west side of Australia, and it's a 5-hour flight from Perth to Sydney, 4 hours from Perth to Melbourne. There's basically nothing in between. So Perth is the most isolated capital city in the world. So we didn't get a ton of touring shows. We would have maybe one a year, but it was really the community theater scene that opened my eyes to everything.
Right.
And then being at WAPA, I mean, it was like the equivalent of New York's LaGuardia
Right.
or Juilliard. It was like the fame school of Australia. So
Right.
that was all I needed at that time. But I knew that my trajectory was going to take me to New York. So I wanted to be in the middle of it. It's why we all end up in New York. It's like
True.
you want to be at the heart of this industry. So yeah, New York was always in my.
Yeah,
my
and tell me about that. How did you start to embark on this career that is so multifaceted once you graduated from NYU?
Yeah, so I really wanted to be in New York, but I actually started my American studies at Arizona State. I did a
Oh,
semester out in Tempe. They have a master's in music direction there. So I did one semester and I was supposed to be there for the whole 2 years, but I had a 2-year visa. And after my first semester, I was like, wait, I'm going to spend 2 years in Arizona and then go back to Australia. That's not my plan. So I discovered the music theater writing program at NYU, and I was able to switch the scholarship and just start over and do my master's in New York. And that was a game changer because obviously that's where, I was able to meet so many people in the industry. And one of those people was William Finn, who came in and did a guest teaching spot. He wasn't teaching full time there, he wasn't on faculty, but he just came in and did a one off. And I always knew that even though I was studying music theater writing, I still wanted to be a music director. And I just knew that that would be my bread and butter. And that had always been just such a big part of my musical theater life. So I went up to Bill Finn at the end of this class that he taught, and I literally just said to him, hey, if you ever need an assistant, if you ever need help with anything, here's my number. And that to this day is like the best thing that I've ever done, because he ended up calling me, and that just resulted in a lot of incredible opportunities.
wow, incredible. I feel like that's so many people I've interviewed have stories like that. And
Mhm.
I think it's just such a lesson in like putting yourself out there and having no
Yep.
fear and knowing
Yep.
that they may not call, but they also may
What
call.
have you got to lose? Yeah. And I actually knew that I'd be able to offer him something as an assistant, because I'd been working for my mentor in Australia, notating music and transcribing and arranging. And I thought, well, I'd heard that he often used his students in that, um, you know, like that. So I was like, well, look, here I am, happy to help and just learn from you as well as assist you. So yeah, it was, yeah, the best thing I've ever done.
And for viewer, I feel like people in theater may know this, but there are definitely some viewers that aren't professionally in theater. So can you, for them and maybe also for me, you wear so many different hats. Can you distinguish those different roles for us, between, composer is sort of self-explanatory, but musical director and arranger, I think, are a little more
Mhm.
blurry. Can you distinguish
Yeah,
those for us?
yeah. And even within the arranging facet, there are a lot of other different
Right.
things. So yes, and it's something that is, I've seen in my career in the last 20 years, it has morphed and been more clearly defined. But the music department of a new show, especially, is huge. There are so many different things to achieve and accomplish. But the music director, basically, your music director is the one who is responsible for teaching the music to the cast, for performing the music, whether it's as a conductor or as a player conductor every night in the show. So you're the head of the music department, and you're responsible for bringing the composer's vision to life in the performance. What has become more and more um, necessary and normal on big commercial shows is a music supervisor. And that person will often have a lot of different roles under the umbrella of music supervisor. So, for example, I'm music supervising The Notebook, which we're going to have a production in Chicago next year, and God willing, go on to do other things. But as a supervisor, I'm responsible for bringing the entire music department together. So
And that's separate from the music director,
yeah,
correct?
from music
Yeah.
director, because the music director will end up conducting all of the performances. Excuse me. So on a big new show, it's especially when you're working with a writer who's not from the musical theater genre. So we have Ingrid
Right.
Michaelson writing the score, who's brilliant and one of the best collaborators I've ever had, but she's not from the theater world. So my job as supervisor and arranger, to both bring the logistics of the music department together and also the creative side. So I'm kind of like Ingrid's right hand person in terms of helping
So
her get
cool.
the music to where she wants to be, but also being the go-between with producers and general management in knowing who to hire to conduct the band, to contract the band, being there at auditions, to help Ingrid figure out, what sort of voice type can sing her material, all of that stuff. So it is multifaceted. And it's, it is a very necessary position in these big new musicals.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It sounds like it's way more sort of almost business side too,
Yeah.
as well as leadership and
Yeah.
and obviously creative skills. That's fascinating. And as you said, you're not necessarily conducting every show, so you can sort of be more like the director who like leaves once the show goes up.
That's exactly right. And I can sit back. One of the hardest things about music directing is that you're a performer. So you are playing the show every night. And often if you're playing piano, that's all you're thinking about. I mean, it can't be all you're thinking about, but you are performing and playing notes, and you
Right.
have to think about your part as a musician. But you're also conducting, you're often playing with one hand, conducting with the other hand, listening to singers, taking notes in your head because you don't have time to write things down. Like, oh, we're going to have to rehearse that tomorrow. Thinking, oh, that we don't have enough underscore for that dialogue scene. It's so much to do as a music director that a music supervisor will be sitting in the audience during the performance and taking all of the notes and, like I said, liaising with the composer and the rest of the creative team about how the music can continue to evolve. It's too
Yeah.
hard to be playing every night and doing all of that stuff in a new musical.
I hadn't even ever thought about that, but that makes total sense because
Yeah.
usually if you're on the directing side, you can be whispering and taking notes.
Really is something that's become more and more prominent because of all the new musicals that are going out. Like, I
Right.
think a revival doesn't always need a music supervisor because the music's set. So the conductor has everything they need. It's written down, it's been done before. But a supervisor is making a lot of creative decisions while the conductor is the vehicle for testing out those decisions every night.
Yeah. And it seems like with when you music direct and when you music supervise now, it seems like you gravitate towards new
Mhm.
musicals. And
Yeah.
a lot of those happen to be contemporary or like pop rock seeming musicals. Is
Mhm.
that like where your heart lies? Is that what you love?
It's such a good question because, like I said earlier, I fell in love with musicals through Side by Side by Sondheim.
Right,
Like
right,
I was like, this Stephen Sondheim guy is an amazing composer, and
right.
that's the kind of music theater. And look, I of course knew Rodgers and Hammerstein, and I'd heard of, it's not like I'd never heard any musicals before, but that was the stuff that really grabbed me, and it just by sheer accident and coincidence that in New York I fell into doing all these new musicals, and it's been incredible. But what's really funny is that the first big show I did as a music director on Broadway was American Idiot,
Right,
and I got dubbed the pop rock music director. And
right.
as you know, I grew up playing classical piano. I was a classical music nerd, and then was a Sondheim nerd. And of course, I love pop music. I love rock music, but it's not what I grew up doing. So it's been cool to navigate this thing, and I feel like it's my dirty little secret that actually I started playing Suzuki piano, and that's what that was my number one intro into music. I was playing Rachmaninoff for my college recital, that kind of thing, and people like, oh yeah, Carmel Dean, she's that rock music director. So I get asked to do a lot of rock stuff. I've never been asked to do a new sort of contemporary classical
Right.
musical.
Wow.
But then when I wrote my first show, Renaissance or Renascence, depending how you want to pronounce it. That was the wheelhouse of my music. And I think people are like, oh, this music is much more in the contemporary classical vein than it is in the pop rock vein. It's not
That
to say I don't love writing in that, because then Well Behaved Women was a lot more, had a lot more contemporary music in it. But Renaissance was very much in the classical theater world.
That was going to be my next question. I definitely feel like Renaissance totally different than like Hands on a Hardbody, American Idiot vibes. So would you say that is more your style when you compose and you sort of compartmentalize when you're music directing or supervising versus when you're composing? Or is it just sort of like a happy accident in both cases?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I started writing the songs for Renaissance 20 years ago. I didn't know I was writing a musical, but that show, the whole score, the lyrics are poems by Edna St. Vincent Millay. So I'd been writing these songs, setting these poems over the last 20 years where I wasn't really composing full time. I was just writing a song like every month or every 2 months or every 6 months. And then I suddenly had enough songs for a show. So I wasn't deliberately thinking, oh, this is what this needs to sound like, or this is
Right.
what my voice, it obviously was my composing voice. And so I was writing that stuff even before I was working on those rock musicals. So I think now, having worked on those shows like American Idiot and Hands on a Hardbody, and having worked with Phish a lot, and worked with Tom Kitt a lot, I think my writing style has changed because I've just been surrounded by different kinds of music. So Well Behaved Women is it's very varied musically. There are a lot of different styles because I was also writing for specific characters and specific women. I'm working on a show now about sailors, the first women sailing team to sail around the world. And that, I would say, is more in the Renaissance vein, but that's because it's all set on the water, and that's what water feels like to me as an artist. It definitely has more of an orchestral, lush sound than a rock and roll sound. So I think maybe it's just going to, be interesting, if I look back 10 years from now, 20 years from now at things that I'm yet to write, where the needle will fall, and if it will just be that it depends what story I'm telling, or I do end up writing in a more classical style. We'll see, I guess.
Well, it sounds like, I think it's probably a matter of just like different paintbrushes for different things. It's all skills that you can acquire, and it's nice that theater, it's cool how much more diverse theater is becoming in terms of even just creative styles, musical styles, because I think 30 years ago you couldn't imagine something like American Idiot on Broadway, and now it's so many, and that's good, but also a more classical seeming musical like Renaissance. This brought up so many questions. First of all, you mentioned you started composing Renaissance 20 years ago. So I'm curious about your process as a composer. How does it go from your head to the page, for example?
Yeah. So that show, like I said, wasn't a show. I didn't know I was writing a show. I was just setting poems and finding my compositional voice.
Right.
But I would just give, when I really felt like I wanted to be creative, I would pick a poem from my book of Malay poetry.
So had you always loved Edna St. Vincent Millay?
I didn't know who she was until I auditioned for the NYU Music Theater Writing Program, because part of that application, and maybe it still is part of it, is to set her sonnet, Time Does Not Bring Relief. So anyone who's been through that program has their own version of Time Does Not Bring Relief.
Wow,
so there are
fascinating.
Hundreds of settings of her poetry out in the world. Her poetry really lends itself to musicalization. So I would write these poems, and then I'd notate them on my music notation software. And it wasn't until I met Dick Scanlon when we were doing a show called Everyday Rapture at Second Stage, that I was just telling him that he knew I was a composer, but I'd never really done anything with my music. And I said, oh, well, I'll give you a CD, a demo CD of all these songs that I'd done. And he famously will tell the story. He says this in interviews. He's like, when Carmel said she was going to give me a CD of her poetry, he rolled his eyes. He's like, oh God, I'm going to have to listen to some poems. but he, you know, thank God something struck a chord in him, and he thought, oh, there is a show here. We can tell a story with these songs. So I never wrote Renaissance in the traditional way of setting out to write a musical. It's
Uh-huh.
actually only now that I'm writing this new show, Maiden Voyage, that I'm writing it with a narrative in mind and with characters in mind. So in the more traditional sense, because Well Behaved Women also was a song cycle. So
Right.
that didn't have a through line story wise.
Right. Huh. That's so interesting. I feel like even if there's no like maybe you can do all these different styles musically, I do feel like when you um, are sort of the leader on your creative projects, the topics seem to often be about women. So I'm
Yeah.
curious if that is important to you.
Yeah, you know, I don't think it's that I ever made that conscious decision. Of
Yeah.
course, now that's, you know, everybody is trying to be necessarily so more aware of the stories that we're telling, and also telling our own stories and not
Right.
appropriating other people's stories. But I, yeah, I have ended up writing for a lot of women characters because that's my experience. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
I've you know, Well Behaved Women was really fun because that was actually a task I set myself. It was the first time I'd written my own lyrics. And I thought, if I just find little bite size songs to write, I don't have to think about an entire show. I'm just going to think about one fascinating woman and what the very specific moment in her life is that she could potentially sing about. And then I would have to figure out how that related to me as a writer. So in a way, it felt like I was being an actor. And I really was, you know, I loved working on that project because it really honed my skills as a writer. And I loved getting into these different characters' heads and finding their voices and finding the specificity of their stories. And of
Totally.
course, you know, the connection is I am a woman, so I have always felt like I'm able to say something from that perspective. I've never been drawn to writing for male characters. Who knows, that might change later. Depends,
Right.
you know,
Who
what
knows? Yeah.
stories come across. Yeah, but
Is there a favorite woman in Well Behaved Women that whose story you were fascinated with that you loved writing the most and
that's
getting?
a great question. Yeah, I loved writing for Billie Jean King, the tennis player, because I wrote
Yeah.
the song in the moment that she's about to go on court and face Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it just became about her being athletic and going up against this guy who was just parading around in front of, you know, 100 million people who are watching, just all ego and tearing Billie Jean down. And it was all about he was being a showman and being so chauvinistic, and she just quietly was like, I'm going to get this guy, I'm going to get this guy. And because it was the 70s, which is one of my favorite eras, I just loved finding that music and bringing that stuff together. And she's also a gay woman, and the song wasn't at all about her sexuality, but I felt like that was also in there. And I as a gay woman, like, okay, all right, there is that thing that, you know, we got extra strength here that we need to get out in this particular moment.
Oh, I
Uh,
love that.
yeah, she's one of my favorites. And I loved writing the song for Malala Yousafzai, who's the
Yeah.
Pakistani teenager who was shot by the Taliban. And the moment I chose for her song was the instant that she got shot on the school bus. And she goes into this, she's basically in like halfway between life and death. And so what goes through our heads when we're on the brink of death? And so it ended up being like a prayer to her father, and she and her father were very close. So the song wasn't just about like, oh my God, I've been shot, I'm going to die. It was about a father and a daughter's relationship. You know, I really did love writing, and I love writing lyrics, as torturous as it is. But I love finding that moment that needs to be sung about.
Well, and it sounds like you can get into like history and literature in a really fascinating way, which is so cool.
That was one of the goals with Well Behaved Women, not only to hone my own writing skills, but I wanted to write something that would be not just entertaining, of course, but educational and
Yeah,
inspiring, because there are all these great women and we don't know half the stories. I could have put 75 songs in this cycle and it still wouldn't be finished. I mean, I think there are
totally.
17 now. But I could keep writing for the rest of my life and adding to it and having like a rotating set list, because there are so many incredible stories out there that
It's
need to be
true.
told.
On this subject, I'm curious. I feel like maybe I'm wrong because I'm not really in this composer and musical director world, but my sense has always sort of been that until now-ish, it's been a little bit of an all boys club. Like I feel like you guys have Janine
Hmm.
Tesori and like Mary Mitchell Campbell and you, and that's like kind of it.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yep.
do you think that that's the case? Do you think it's changing?
Oh, 100%, 100%. Look, it has been a boys club for 100 years since the industry started.
Yeah,
Um, but of course, there are so many important conversations that are being had right now, and pre-COVID, a lot of it was just about gender parity, and
right.
since COVID and Black Lives Matter, it is rightly so being expanded to diversity on the whole, and racial, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, sexual orientation diversity, able-bodied, disabled, but we need to have these conversations. But yeah, for years and years I was the only woman at the table. I so many times I would go out of town with a show and I would walk into the first rehearsal and there were all local players in the band and there were all these old dudes. I'll
Yeah.
never forget my first rehearsal for Vanities, which was probably 15, 16 years ago. We were doing it out in Pasadena, I think. Yeah, it was Pasadena. Um, and I was probably not even 30 at the time. I still felt young and inexperienced, but I was music directing. And I walked into rehearsal and it was all middle-aged white guys, and they saw me walk in and they were all like, I just got this attitude that they're like, oh God, we're going to be conducted by this young female. Okay, here we go. And I had to work really hard to earn their respect. And, I mean, it ended up being fine, but so many of us, I'm sure you've gotten it too, like walking into rooms um, where we're not included right away. We've had to fight really hard to have our voices heard and to be leaders. It's something that, thank God, is changing. Thank God. Um, but yeah, it's been fascinating living through the change.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for people like Janine and Mary Mitchell and Kim Grigsby, who was one of the only female music directors that I knew when I came to New York. I remember having lunch with her like within the first few weeks of coming to New York, and I was like, it's Kim Grigsby. Like, she's famous because she's the female music director on Broadway. There's still only,
Yeah.
probably less than 10 female music directors on Broadway. And look, we can't even talk about composers. There's Janine, obviously, Amanda Green, fantastic. Um, but you can count on one hand the number of female composers that are represented in any one season.
Yes. When I was little, I always liked Music Man better because I thought Meredith Wilson was a woman.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then I was like, oh, I guess I don't like it that much
Like,
anymore.
well, now I really don't like it, because who calls their boy Meredith?
It's definitely cool that it's changing. And as you say, even I have had moments like that, more so on the directing side than on the acting side, even though as an actor, has its own misogynistic problems. I remember I
Yeah.
had a director very early, like just when I graduated college, who knew all the boys' names and all the girls were honey baby sweetheart. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. But I don't think you can get away with that now. Yeah, and that's not long ago. That's 5 years ago. And I think that
Yeah.
that's changed already,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is good. I'm
Yeah.
also curious, I mean, not controversial, but on the same sort of like tricky subject. I feel like I've seen within the community a lot of sort of hullabaloo and questions about why, for example, there isn't a Tony Award for Best Musical Director of a musical on
Oh,
Broadway.
don't get me started.
Oh, I want to get you started.
Oh,
What's
it
your
it drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy. And Ted Sperling for many years has been sort of leading the charge with trying to rectify it. I think people don't understand what the job is.
yeah,
That's honestly what it is. And it blows my mind that there's a Tony Award for sound design now, which I think is great and is right. Um, but music directors are the ones making the music happen. And I think because it's an invisible job, you don't see it,
right.
it gets diffused into all the other categories. So obviously, best composer, the person who's writing the music, the sound designer, you're making the music sound good or not. But the music director is responsible for bringing that music to life. But how do you quantify it? How do you?
Yeah.
I actually think it's easy. I mean, I think how good does the ensemble sound? How clean are their cutoffs? Like, how does the music affect the emotional journey that you're in? Like, really listen to how the dynamics play into a scene, or just how vocal effects are used, how vocal technique, is if a show's been running for 3 months, does the cast still sound good or do they sound busted? Like that's the music director's job, is to help maintain the musical integrity of the show. So I think there should be an award and people just need to educate themselves into what they're listening for. The same way that they have to educate themselves into what a good sound designer does. I mean, the rest of the creative team walks away, but it's the stage manager and the music director that stay and keep the show going. I mean, it's a huge responsibility, and I really think it's criminal that that isn't recognized. Um, in our industry. Look at billing too, and I notice it when I come to Australia because all the billing will happen on a poster, and then it's music direction by blah blah, directed by blah blah. Like music director is second in command in Australia, but in the States it's always music director, rest of the creative team, and then choreography by, directed by.
Why
I
do
mean,
you
I think
think that is? Why do
choreography is very important. Obviously, I'm not saying it's not, but it should be choreography and music direction right there. I mean,
Yeah, why do you think that is in America?
I just don't know. I have no idea. No, I think it's because people don't understand it.
Yeah, you can take for granted the things that you were talking about, like the cast doesn't sound busted, the cutoffs are great, how are the dynamics? As you say, it's
Mhm.
if it's good, I think you take those things for granted
That's
because you only
right.
notice them if they're bad.
Yeah, that's the same with sound design.
Yeah,
You don't notice good sound design. You're not supposed to. That's the whole point. Or an educated theater goer will think, "Oh my God, this sounds incredible," because there are no problems, because I can hear everything perfectly. It's a
totally.
very similar thing to music direction. And I think the other problem in that audiences don't understand or appreciate the music department is that so often now the band is hidden. The band will be in the pit, which is covered up, or the band is backstage, or the band is in the third floor dressing room. You do not see the conductor standing up and taking a bow at the beginning of the show and then taking the baton and then beginning the show, like actually cueing the audience and the company that it's time to begin this journey. So the absence of that, I think is really sad. And when I'm music directing, which I obviously I'm not doing as much, but if I have a say in whether the band is in a pit or somewhere else, I'm always going to say, let's go in the pit or on stage. I mean, American Idiot was incredible because we were part of the action.
Well, it's so
I,
interesting. It makes me think of what you said earlier, that the band and the conductor are performers. They're
Mhm.
performing the show too, ideally in the traditional way when they were in the pit. That's so interesting. And that's something I love about like great old musical revivals, is because you still have the conductor setting up and
Yeah. Yeah,
doing the
it's a
baton and
traditional, yeah, the traditional conductor pose.
exactly. Well, so you wear all these different hats as we've discussed. Do you identify with one in particular over the others? Do you like doing it all? Have you ever felt pressure to like
Mm.
decide your one over
Mm.
another?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So for years, I really just wanted to be a music director.
Mm,
Um, Even though I had studied composition and I was still writing a little bit. And
yeah.
then I got to a point um, just after American Idiot, I think, where I think I was both burnt out from working so hard as a music director, but also realizing that I had music that I wanted to write and I had things I wanted to say as a creative person myself. I didn't want to just bring other people's music to life. And so I thought, well, the only way I can do that is to quit music directing. So, sort of made many grand sweeping statements to people who would listen. And I'm not music directing anymore. I'm just going to write. And that was probably mid 20 teens. And that was when I really started focusing on Renaissance happening and working with Transport Group and developing it over a couple of years. Um, but then after those couple of years went by and Renaissance had an amazing run, which I was very grateful for, I also realized, oh, I really miss music directing, or I miss being in a room, like being in a being at your desk by yourself all day as a writer is really lonely and really depressing.
Well,
So
you're going right back to your Suzuki days with that.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So I swung back and I was like, oh, I have to get back into it. I don't want to, I don't think I ever declared I don't want to write, but I thought, okay, I need to find that balance. And that's where I'm at right now. And this is probably the first time in my life that I've had different projects on my plate at the same time as a composer and an arranger, supervisor, and orchestrator. And it is challenging figuring out how to spend my days and get everything done. But I think I'm the happiest I've been work-wise because I get to tick all those boxes.
From a business perspective, not to get too technical, does that mean you have like different agents and managers for all of these different roles? Are you in different unions for all of these different
That's a
things?
good question. No, I'm in the musicians union, which is a great, strong union in New York. I have, uh, I call him my agent, but he's my entertainment lawyer. And he is fantastic and he will take care of everything. You know, he's the best in the biz, I think. So he understands all of the different hats that I wear,
Right.
which not every agent and every lawyer does. And I think the other tricky thing is, without getting into the financial details, but writers don't make a lot of money. I know very few writers who are able to make a living from writing. Either you what is that saying about making a killing? So you don't make a living, you make a killing. So
I've never heard.
it's like feast or famine, basically.
Right,
So,
right.
you look at Stephen Schwartz or Lin-Manuel, like they've written these incredibly successful musicals that they're obviously surviving off of their writing. A lot of people who, people we know and respect as writers are probably not making a living off of their writing. They're also teaching, they're also music supervising, they're also having to do a lot of other jobs just because of the pay structure, because of the structure of how new musicals work. I mean, if it's an off-Broadway show, you'll get a cut of the box office, which is not much. I mean, it's just really not much. If it's a big commercial Broadway show, if the show does well, great. Look at Wicked, look at Dear Evan Hansen. But most shows aren't those long running hits. Um, so I think for people like me who have the fortune to be able to go from supervising and arranging to writing, that really balances it all out too.
And you've dabbled, or I shouldn't say dabbled, you've also worked in sort of actual pop rock outside of
A
a
little
theater
bit, yeah.
context.
Yeah.
What has that been like?
Well, I mean, Trey Anastasio just like changed my world and my life. He's just one of the greatest people I've ever met, one of the best collaborators and so kind. Growing up in Australia, I actually had never heard of Phish, the band, Phish. But most Americans are like, oh, Phish. Yeah, of course I know Phish. And then they'll say, oh, yeah, my cousin is a Phish head who will
Right.
follow Phish around, so
Yeah.
it's a religion. And so it's been fascinating getting to know that whole world. And I met Trey because he wrote the music to Hands on a Hardbody. But as soon as and that, I talked to Trey about writing a Broadway musical. He worked on that for 5 years and it played for 3 weeks on Broadway. It was heartbreaking,
Yeah.
heartbreaking. And Doug Wright, who has a Pulitzer Prize, wrote that show. It was an excellent show. And Amanda Green, who's written maybe 4 Broadway musicals. So that's the thing about being a writer. You can't count on anything. Just we don't have a formula on how to write a Broadway hit. If we did, we'd all be fine. Um, so Trey and I, we only worked together for a little while on the show because it closed, but
Right.
then we got along so well and we had such a good time together. And he was very lovely. He loved the way that I wrote vocal arrangements. So then he asked me to come work with his band with Phish. So I do the occasional. They have this bit they do where they all put their instruments down and do an a cappella song either at the beginning or the end of a show. So one of the first things Trey asked me to do was an a cappella 4-part arrangement of David Bowie's Space Oddity. So, and they did that at Wrigley Field in Chicago. So, I went and I'm standing in the middle of 15,000 people listening to this vocal arrangement I did for these 4 like random rock dudes. And it went off and it was like so fun, so incredible. And Trey has just constantly called me and asked me to do things for him and really has run the gamut from just doing one song for Wrigley Field to supervising and arranging a New Year's Eve show at Madison Square Garden. Um, and he's such a great person. I just can't say enough good things about him.
And it's so great that you are able, as we've said throughout this episode, to dip your toes into all these different styles and come out of theater entirely and go write this, a cappella arrangement of David Bowie. I mean, it's a testament to your flexibility as an artist and also ingenuity as an artist, which is awesome. I always end with an ending segment, soon to be revealed. But my last question for you before we do is a multi-part question. First of all, do you have advice for aspiring musical directors, arrangers, composers?
Mm-hmm. Get as much experience as you can working on different shows, on different styles of shows. I mean, I feel like every production I'm a part of is a whole new education. I still feel like this at the age of 42. I'm always learning on the job because there are very few opportunities for us to go to school and study music direction. I mean, there are like many more places where you can do that now. But like I said, the education, so much of it comes from doing and working in community theater and working in high school theater and just knowing what all of the different parts of your job are as a music director. And as a composer too, it's just listening to other people's music and not just musical theater, but listening to music, like from any genre, any era. I think it's really important that we keep educating ourselves.
My follow-up to that is, which I was thinking about earlier, because I think fewer people know about it and are educated about the job. What do you think, in your mind, having done it so many different times, makes a good music director?
I think first and foremost, you have to be a good communicator. And I think not just in the traditional sense, using your words, that's a massive part of it. You want to be able to have conversations with the composer and the director and clearly state what your needs are and ask for what or know what they need. But then you have to be able to communicate as a band leader and as a choir leader, and you have to know you have to understand the voice, and you have to understand instruments, and you have to be a supportive person. Almost in a way, you have to be a therapist to actors. Because if you're doing a long running show, they're going to come to you all the time with their problems. Like, I can't hit this note, or I forgot what this harmony is, or so and so singing the wrong thing in my ear. I mean, just a lot of it's you have to be a people person. Honestly, you have to be a people person.
The number of times I cried to my music director when I did Mary Poppins was really too
Yeah.
many accounts. So
Yeah,
that
you're that person who's always there, and you have to be trusted, and you have to be level-headed. I think I swear that's the thing that's gotten me so many jobs in my life, is that I am, for the most part, pretty level-headed, and putting on a new musical is so freaking stressful. And I mean, it's not that I'm not full of anxiety on the inside, but on the outside, I, for the most part, will just remain calm and say, yes, yes, we'll figure this out. All right, hold please. We need some time to figure this out. I can't ever lose my cool.
yeah, having worked with you, I can be a testament to that. You're cool as a cucumber. And that's what I would say is the most important thing in anybody on a creative team, because it's so stressful, and you need to be a leader in the room, and you need to ask what you want, as you say. And my last part to that question is, specifically, do you have advice for women looking to go into this sort of all boys club field?
Yeah, well, look, luckily, I don't think it is an all boys club. Well, we're on the cusp of it not being an all boys club. I think people are wanting to hire women now more than they ever have. I have been looking for a music director for Mystic Pizza. It's a show I'm doing up at Ogonquit. We start rehearsals in 5 weeks, and I think I asked 15 women to music direct before I could find someone. So that it was bad news, and it was really good news, because those 15 women were all busy doing other jobs.
Oh, wow.
So I am just so astounded that I couldn't find a female music director, and I was asking really good people, and people with little experience, and people sort of mid-career, early career, run the gamut. So I think that's the good news, that women are being hired now. I think if you're still trying to figure out how to crack, like get into the scene, create an online presence for yourself, have a website, go on Maestra, the female. Do you know about Maestra?
I do not.
Oh, Katie, you need to know about Maestra. So it's an organization set up by Georgia Stitt. It's been running for a few years now.
I love her, yeah.
They run classes and workshops, and they have monthly meetings. And there's also a directory, and every female identifying composer, music director, musician can register on the website. And that's how people are getting jobs now. I mean, producers, luckily, will say, oh, I want a female music director, I want a female orchestrator, and they'll go to the Maestra website and type in orchestrator, and then the directory will show who can orchestrate.
That's fabulous.
It's a game changer. Yeah.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah. So it's put yourself on Maestra. Yep.
That's great. I'm actually writing that down right now. Okay, we've moved on to our ending segment, though I could talk to you forever. And this I call the Thank You 5 segment. So it's 5 rapid fire questions. Let's answer it off the top of your head. Firstly, your biggest pet peeve as a musical director?
People who don't do their homework.
I would say that goes across the board. That's
right. Not specific to music. Yeah.
Favorite, this may be tough, so you could give a couple, but favorite musical you've worked on so far?
Oh, that I've worked on. Oh, it's like asking someone their favorite child.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Look, American Idiot was great. I don't know. I might have to go back and say Spelling Bee.
It's so special. Everyone who did Spelling Bee seems like it was just like a magical group of people.
It really was magical. And it ran for almost 3 years.
Such a good example of like the small musical that could, like it's proof of that I can work. The biggest difference you see between working in Australia versus working in New York?
Ooh. We don't have the support for new musicals here in Australia.
Interesting.
We don't have the government support. We don't have the general public support. People want to make new musicals, but we don't know how to do it here. A, because the population is so much smaller. B, we don't have the experience. You know, it's such a New York art form. And over the last century, we in New York have figured out how to do it to varying degrees of success, obviously. But we know there's a 29-hour reading, and then there's a workshop, and there's a workshop, and then you take it out of town. And that pathway doesn't exist here. There's no such thing as out of town in Australia. There's no regional theater scene. You know, there are no real sort of regional towns that have theaters in them. Even like we've got a handful of big theaters in the major capital cities. That's it. So you're up against a lot of brick walls in Australia, but I think it's changing. It's slowly changing. Like there are a lot of producers here now who are interested in cultivating Australian stories, Australian voices, and people who have experience in the bigger Broadway commercial side, the Broadway sized shows here, and bringing shows over. So I think it's changing. I'm very curious to see what will happen in the next decade.
Yeah, I'm curious too, because as I said, I feel like for a hot second there, all eyes were on Australia in a way that had never been before. And I was suddenly like, oh, what's the theater scene like in Australia?
Yeah. A lot of new plays, because it's
Oh,
obviously cheaper to produce.
right.
But musicals are so much more expensive and just bigger risks for producers.
Is there a topic that you feel is like ripe for composition for a new musical that hasn't yet been done that you're thinking about?
Gosh. I mean, there are themes that I always want to explore as a writer. I think the complexity of relationships between women, just in general, not specific romantic relationships, but friendships with women, or mother-daughter relationships, or sisters, or colleagues. I think that is fascinating to me, and that's something that I'm wanting to explore in my own writing now.
You're speaking my language. I wrote my thesis on female friendship in Jane Austen novels. So, I've been dying to do something with it theatrically for a long time, but I love Austen so much, so I don't feel ready yet, if that makes sense, because I wouldn't want to do her badly. We'll talk. We'll offline.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And lastly, you kind of already answered this, but a woman who came before you in your field who you admire?
Well, I mean, Janine Tesori comes to mind because she's present, and she also started as a music director, but she pretty early on decided that she only wanted to be a composer. So she's the first person that comes to mind, and she's just a strong, powerful, kick-ass woman, a great leader. But thinking back before that, I mean, look, I love Chita Rivera. Chita's popped into my head because she is one of the hardest working people I know, and her work ethic's so high. And she's always been a huge advocate for the hoofers, for the Broadway chorus people. I mean, she's had this incredibly long and successful career. But the thing that I would always just take away from her is that she's worked hard. She would put her head down and she would work hard, and she'd do her homework, and she would be prepared, and she would be respectful, and then, come out and kill it on stage.
Yeah. The people that I've worked with who have been the most like celebrated and famous have also been people like you think that they're going to be like satisfied or just like it comes easily, whatever. And in some cases it comes easily, but I've been fascinated to see like they work so
hard,
freaking hard, so hard. They're the ones going home after rehearsal and like saying, no, I can't go out, I'm going to work.
Right, exactly.
Is there anything that I've missed? Anything you want to talk about? This has been so fun. I could talk forever, but
I know you're a great interviewer.
Thank you.
It's so fun. It feels like we're just having a chat. So it's been great.
That's how it should feel. That's how it should feel. Well, it was the best chatting, and I'm so looking forward to seeing everything that you're doing. Mystic Pizza is one of my favorite movies ever, so I'm
Oh,
very.
come up to Maine and see it at
When is
Algonquin.
it happening?
We're in performances all of September.
So exciting. Well,
Yeah,
maybe I
come
will
to
make a
Maine.
little road
Yeah.
trip. I've never been to Ogunquit.
Oh, have to come. Put that
Okay.
on the list. Yeah.
Okay, it's on the list. Thank you, Carmel. And we're going to stay tuned for that, for the notebook, for all these other exciting projects you're doing. And thank you for watching Call Time, listeners. Next week, we have one of our special episodes focused on a soon to be announced player musical. And I can't wait to go in depth with that. Thanks so much. Have a good week.